Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well and welcome back to another AFL Fantasy Strategy Roundtable where we aim to help you make all the big decisions that you have to make for your AFL Fantasy side this week. You've got two trades this week. Use them or lose them. And whether your focus is rankings or leagues, there's some stuff we have to talk about on this week's episode that I think is certainly going to help you navigate the moves you need to make over the next couple of weeks. Joining me on this podcast, as he has for the past couple of years now, he's a part of the Coaches Panel and the AFL Fantasy Fanatics. We will talk about them more in just a moment. Jordox, mate, nice to see you. And you're up and about. Is that because your AFL Fantasy team had a good week or the Crows decided to turn up this week, or is it both?
A bit of both, my man. No, I'm up and about because there's just so much going on in the fantasy world. So it's great for us to get on here and have a chat. And we're going to see so many decisions that the community has to make in these last few weeks. We're going to finish the year with a lot of different teams. Like most years, we end pretty much identical forward lines last year. But this year, it's really up in the air. So I think it's great. This is how the game should be. And yeah, it's good to see Phil Thorpe back on Saturday night. Not going to lie.
All right.
Yeah.
This is turning into the Crowject very, very quickly. Shout out to those boys, by the way. The reason I mentioned that is another Crows fan has joined the podcast. No, I've not got them out of hiding from the year, but we've been wanting to get this man on the podcast for, pretty much since the preseason. He's been a regular part of the 50 most relevant preseason series that we do, but he's the host and one of the faces behind the AFL Fantasy Fanatics, the brains behind the Content Creators Cup, and one of the great guys in the AFL fantasy community. Bales, mate, nice to see him. Welcome to the Coaches Panel AFL Strategy Roundtable.
Thanks, MJ. Jorlox, good to be here, make my roundtable debut. I can't lie, I was looking so forward to talking about a certain forward that came out today that was injured, but that means that, again, another obstacle the coach has got to look around, and I'm sure we'll be chatting about plenty of other relevant players. So now looking forward to it.
Yeah, a lot of lamenting on this episode already as we were chatting just before we went live with the podcast about Mateus Philippou, who, that just between you and me, put him in your black book for 2025. Speaking of the 50 most relevant, yeah, the preseason work's already begun. He's probably going to feature just quietly in that 50. We'll see how we go. Boys, there's a lot of stuff I want to talk to you on this episode. I want to talk about fixtures. I want to talk about matchups. I want to talk about the decisions you're making in your teams and the advice you want to give coaches as they're future forecasting in really these final handful of weeks now that we have, whether it's league or rankings focused. We are looking at now all these nuanced details. Most coaches have hit luxury trade season. Potentially they've been there for a week or two already, but definitely the overwhelming majority of the AFL community that play AFL fantasy are now in places of luxury trading or injury-forced trading, as it might be for some. So I want to talk about that a little bit. But right out of the top, I want to talk about the players that from now till the end of the year, who we think are going to be the best for the rest. And we'll work our way through not just the best 6 defenders, but we'll talk about the best 8, not just the top 8 midfielders, but we'll talk about the top 10. And I'm going to base it off Jaiden, who does a power of great work. He was on the AFL Strategy Roundtable last week. If you haven't checked out the Stats by Jaiden website, seriously, friends, you need to do it. But rather than going kind of line by line through our own, all right, who's your top 8 defenders, Jordox? All right, MJ, who's yours? Is I wanted to use Jaiden's projections of players from here on in, and we won't go so much through the details and the data of what he's projected them to be, but I want to go line by line, tell you who he's projected in every single position to be the top scorers from here on in. And then I'd love to hear from you, lads. Is there someone you'd be kicking out of that list that he's got? And then if you're kicking someone out, you've got to put a name back in. I'll give a couple of caveats before I let you loose. But first, I'll give you some names and then the caveats, and then we'll go back line through to the forward line from there. These are the top 8 defenders, according to Jaiden's stats projections for AFL Fantasy from now to the end of the year. Here we go. Sheasel, Young, Dacos, Whitfield. This name might surprise a few. Crisp, Newman, and then he's got as bench options, but inside his top 8 defenders, Martin and Rivers. I know we talked about him on the AFL Fantasy Fanatics podcast with the review episode just a couple of days ago. If you haven't subscribed to the boys, make sure you do that. So that's the defenders. I'll go through the rest of the lines and then we'll come our way back through. Midfield, Bontempelli, Treloar, Goulden, Sarong, Brayshaw, LDU, Merritt, Steele makes a return, Dunkley, Liberatore. That's his top 10 midfielders. The 3 rucks, English, Marshall, and Cherry. And then in the forward line, let's be honest, there's not going to be too many surprises, at least 4 of them, hey? Flanders, Zorko, Heaney, Caldwell. This is where it starts to open up. Simpkin at 5. Jackson, Myers, and Harry Mackay. Now, before we go back through the lines, here's some caveats that I've got from Jaiden that we've got to run through, because you might be hearing some of these names and feeling like some absentees that I want to tell you why they're there, and then we'll run loose. He says, well, there's a couple of caveats you've got to win. One, Crisp may not be a full-time midfielder anymore, and we're seeing that a little bit based on the role he's playing. So he could very, very quickly move out of that spot. So that's his caveat, that there's the qualification of not just position in fantasy, but the position of where he's actually playing. We're seeing some statistical kind of variance. So that's there. He said about Max Gawn, he's not there because he's not listed to play, although he's a test. But if he was playing, he would be R1. So that's his caveat on that. Jackson won't be there as soon as Darcy comes back and plays. And Darcy's been confirmed to come back this week alongside Alex Pearce, which Footy Rhino has come out and shared this week on X. So just keep that there. Mason Woods had a role change and a classification positional change. He's no longer wing-based, but he's a general forward. So if he moves back to play in that wing, okay, now he's an option. And Brad Hill is also missing, as he's unsure what position he would sit, given politely across the year he's played half forward, half back, and wing. So a little bit of juggling all over there. So some caveats from Jaiden to work our way through. Now that we've done that, let's go to the back line. I'll run you through the 8. Bales, you can have first crack. Who are you taking out and who would you put in? And then Jordoc's keen on your thoughts. So on the field, he's saying Sheasel, Young, Dacos, Whitfield, Crisp, and Newman. Remember, there's that caveat on Crisp. And then he's got Martin and Rivers really, really close in those projections. Anyone you're taking out and anyone you're putting in, Bales, in that back line for the best for the rest for 2024?
Yeah, so looking at the 8 defenders there, I think for me, Sheasel, Dacos, Whitfield, and Newman, I really like. Particularly, I've mentioned Newman a few times of how good his run is to end the season, and Martin as well, and even Trent Rivers, who's come alive in the last 4 weeks playing that midfield role. I think he could definitely be there. I think for me, Crisp obviously would be out. I think we can all agree that if he's not playing this full-time mid role, he's not gonna be a top 8 or top 6. And Young's the other one that I'm sort of a bit iffy about because he's playing a little bit more forward. He's still CBAs are there. His game time's a bit lower. And I think defense is where points can be made up with some different players. So a couple that I like is, people aren't going to like this. Still like Luke Ryan, especially with Brendan Cox in there now and also Alex Pearce back. It means that Luke Ryan can become that general intercepting sort of defender that we know. And he's got Melbourne this week, and then he's also got West Coast. And I think he's got the Bombers, then Geelong. So not a bad month coming up. Max Holmes, I like as well for Geelong, and his teammate, one of Jordox's favourites. I'm sure he'll talk about Tom Stewart, is there as well in this midfield role that also goes back. And then the other one I like as well is Nasai Wangani Miller as a defender, and his teammate Sinclair as well. But his role's a bit sort of shifting. It's midfield last few weeks. He can go back. So whereas Nasai Wangani Miller, I know where he's playing. He's probably not going to get the tag. So if I did probably chuck someone in there at this moment, I think Tom Stewart would be the one for Jack Crisp. Just with that role. Can you get much better role than playing midfield, then going back to the back line again, all these +6s to sort of stuff your score up. So, and then Luke Ryan / Nasaya would probably be one of the other guys that you could maybe go in for Young, but I'd probably just make the one change if I needed to, which would be
okay. So to be clear, Crisp is out. Tom Stewart's in, taking that number 5 spot, whether you want to move Newman up, Martin up, Rivers up, sure. But you're just making one change off the basis of these projections. Crisp out, Tom Stewart in. And you're giving us a couple of nice names there that just make the list. And for the reference, the gap in Jaiden's kind of projections from like D6 to D12 is like 1 or 2 points per game. So it's really, like you mentioned there, Bales, it's really clamored with players that we could find in that unique spot. So I think it's a really good shout. What about for you, Jordox? Is there, out of that 8, is there any obvious outs? And if there is, who's out and who are you putting into your best 8 based off this projection list?
Yeah, it's pretty similar. It's well surmised by Bales, but I did have Stewart in for Crisp as well. For the same reason that Crisp is losing that midfield role. I'm not convinced he is, though. I know there's been a bit of a shift in the last couple of weeks, but Collingwood haven't really played as well as they could have. So I wonder if they'll have a rethink on that. I saw something today about a bit of a setback for Tom Mitchell. They're playing a lot of young guys in there at the moment, which is good. I wouldn't be surprised for the run home if we saw them stick to what's worked for them this year, which has been playing Jack Crisp as a pure mid. So, if that flips back, he can sit in the 6 and remain there. The other one that I liked was, Max Holmes, who's Bales touched on as well, just for that consistency. The whole year, he's pretty much been, barely dropped under 90. I think the week before last, he finally did. And then, look, the last one, I don't know where I'd put him, but he's a real curious watch, and that is Jack Sinclair. All those Saints boys have got the advantage of playing every game at Marvel from here on. And I just wonder with Sinclair, if they settle him down a little bit and find a spot for him rather than bit of back, bit of mid, bit of back, bit of mid. Saints are still trying to work out what they're doing, and their year's just about cooked, I think it is. So Jack Sinclair should be on this list because of how good he is. So I don't know what it is that's affected him this year, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him come home like a steam train.
So Crisp, we talked about, he's been up in around the 70s and 80s of centre bounce attendances for most of the year. He dropped down to under 50% on the weekend. And it's a slight gradual regression, and that's what Jaiden's been alluding to for us there. You mentioned St Kilda, and Bales also touched on how good the scoring is at Marvel Stadium. These are the opponents that they've got coming up, just to keep that as a factor in mind. They've got West Coast, Essendon, Brisbane, Richmond, Geelong, and Carlton. If he plays in that inside midfield role, you could argue, and with no Philippou, who we're all lamenting not being able to have that conversation on this episode, that could arguably the best inside midfield run if he plays in that inside midfield role. Now, it's a little bit different when he sits in that kind of rebounding halfback sort of role in terms of how good it is, but it's still very, very favourable. So that's an interesting one. So you're saying Crisp out for you too, Jordox, just to be clear, and Stewart in. So are you both almost, this is very AFL Fantasy Fanatics, you both in step with each other. Well, are you the same?
I'd also put Sinclair.
Okay, so who's out? You can't put someone in and not put someone out.
I reckon Rivers.
Okay, so Rivers and Crisp out for you, and you're going to put Stewart and the Sinclair in, and you're just going to stock Newman up a spot higher, Martin a spot higher, or where you place it? Let's be clear now.
Okay, let's see. We'll put Newman and Sinclair on the. No, we'll leave Martin on the pine with Newman.
Okay.
Sinclair can go on with Stewart.
Okay, so some big changes there if you like that. All right, so there you go.
And this
is interesting names.
This isn't based on anything other than just, what I think right now. So
that's the whole purpose of it. Because again, in a few moments' time, I do want to talk about what are the things that are the factors that you are looking at right now for coaches that are getting towards pushing deep for league finals or league rankings. What are these factors? And we'll talk about, is it ownership percentage? Is it fixture? Is it the legacy of history? I want to talk about that in a moment. But staying with the best 22, remember, might just help you find a little bit of a unique one here from the boys. Let's go back to the midfield. These are the projections according to Jaiden and his scores going forward. Bontempelli is the number one. Treloar, that's why I was going to trade him. Goulden, Sarong, Brayshaw, LDU, Merritt, and Steele are his top 8, with Dunkley probably surprising some, given how expensive he is and how good his form has been really since, well, most of the year, to be fair. And then probably the biggest surprise of all, Tom Liberatore. He has him inside the top 10 midfielders for the rest of the year. That's clearly 3 dogs in the top 10. Fixture driving a lot of that based on his projections of what's going to happen. So, Bales, back to you. There's a lot of good names that you could throw into this top 10. Are you making any changes to the order and to the names? What are you thinking? Who's going to be your top 10 off the basis of this projection base?
Yeah, for me, I will. Sorry, Jade. There's got to be a few changes here because the Treloar is great, but actually bring him. Just after that late change, are we really going to be bringing a guy that's so expensive into our lineups, knowing this can happen again? Like all year, that's been the sort of knock on him, right? We've sort of gone, do we want to jump into him? He's got this ability to be sort of soft tissue injury or laid out, and it was a late laid out. So I don't know. Based on projection, he could be in there, but I'm not sure you're bringing him in. Sarong and Brayshaw are the interesting pair, right? Because Brayshaw's gone big, and then he's gone 80s, and Sarong has just been 5 scores in a row over 80. I think he's had 1 score over 107 since round 3, which is the 141 against Richmond. So he's interesting. LDU, North Melbourne got a great run home, so he's a bit of a smoky that I don't mind being in there. Could be probably on the bench in 9 or 10. Mm-hmm. And then Libba, I don't know if I could be confident just with the concussion history for him as well. So a few of the guys I'm counting that I'd be putting in there. So I know he's had a couple of down weeks, but Sam Walsh for me is one I'd be chucking in there. He's got a great run home. He's got North and Port in the next 2, which North have, funny enough, been quite restrictive for inside mids this year. So, and then Port Adelaide. But then after that, he's got a great run home. I'm just getting up his fixture here because this is also good for Cripps as well.
It's Collingwood, Hawthorn, West Coast, St Kilda is that last 4 that you were alluding to.
Exactly. So I like him. I still don't mind Jordan Dawson. I know he's been a little bit down the last few weeks, but with Crouch, obviously, he's now out for the year. Rankin's still got another 3 games on the sidelines. I still think he can get a lot of points in there. And Tim Taranto, after obviously missing this week, would be another one I'm keen on. Got a good last month. And then the final one, Tom Green. I think that we've seen the best of him over the last month. He's gotten over that ankle injury. And he's looking good. So if I had to change, I think it would be Brayshaw, Libba, Treloar, and probably Sarong would be the 4 guys out. And I'd probably chuck in Tom Green, Sam Walsh. Still got Dawson in there.
Dawson makes it, okay.
And then probably Taranto would be those 4. That would be the 4.
Even though he doesn't play this week, you're still happy to back him in with the loss of a week?
Yeah. So, he's obviously got Port this week anyway, which is going to be tough, but it's the 5 games after that where he starts with Collingwood. Maybe you don't bring him in that week, but then he's got North, St Kilda, Hawthorn, and Gold Coast to finish the year. So, not going to get tagged either. I think he'll be good to go. So, I like Taranto. Maybe not on the field, maybe on the 9 or 10.
9 or 10 spot. Okay. Yeah. So, he's getting an honourable mention, but he's not making... No love for those that are watching on YouTube or are fans of the Fanatics are very familiar with Bale's adoration for one particular crow that didn't get a reference in your top 15 names that you've processed it through. How close did Rory Laird get to sneaking into your top 10? I love that you're not being biased about that Laird number 1 for days. How close to you is Rory Laird actually being a top 10 mid for the rest of the year in your eyes?
Well, he's M0 for me. He's better than everyone. So with Rory Laird, I do like him as a pod. It's just the role that, he's got this inside midfield role, but his only his 2 big scores of late came against Sydney and St Kilda, which was both highly contested games, and both were. I remember the Sydney game was a little bit dewy in that game, and he had only had the 6 tackles in that one. But then the game obviously last week was, if there was ever a game built for Rory Laird, it was that week where he had 31 touches, 13 tackles. So, and his run is a bit. Not a huge fan of the run though, he's got the Bombers, Hawthorn, Geelong, Bulldogs, and finishes with Port Adelaide and Sydney. So that's probably the only reason I've probably got Dawson on the bench of the top 8 as well, just because the run's not as kind. But
yeah, outside of that Geelong fixture, it's pretty darn close to one of the worst for ranking our inside mids. And Jordan to a degree is relatively bulletproof because he can float back, take intercept possessions, play off that halfback role, pick 30 possessions, and let alone 30 AFL fantasy points within a 2-minute window if the Crows are trying to kill the ball. So which Laird at the moment's not doing.
Yeah, and with Dawson, I think the reason I've got him on the bench is because he's got that ceiling, which we have. Funny enough, this year for mids, outside of probably maybe a handful of them, we haven't seen this massive ceiling. For example, Zach Merritt, who's been a perennial 110 plus averaging player, you can essentially bank on him for maybe 3, 4, 5 scores over 130, 140 for the year. I think he's had one, which was 135 way back in round 3 or 4. So guys like that, it's just the ceiling scores haven't been there. It's really been Gould and Dunkley and probably Bont are probably the 3, and Dawson's hit a few, but he's had those real stinkers that sort of offset that a little bit. So I think that's why I've got him still there in the 10, but not on the field because of that tough run.
All right. So there you go. Some pretty big surgery off the basis of what Jaiden's given us is his objective projections. Jordox, what about for you? So of the names that are there, who's forcing their way out, who's forcing their way in, or you think Jaiden's projections are pretty much about spot on?
Well, far be it for me to go against the great man's projections, but based on, the way I see the game, which is probably a little bit more short-sighted and more about feel than fixturing and whatnot, and we'll touch on that later. So I've got a few changes here. I'm going to go and take Libba out because, it's an interesting one, Libba. He's been quite underwhelming. For obvious reasons. He's had the concussion issues, and it's been so impressive that he's even come back to play. So I suppose we shouldn't be surprised he's eased his way back, and maybe now he can catch fire and prove Jaiden right. But for now, I've taken him out, and I've put Lachie Neale in and popped him on the bench. He's in some sort of form right now, and I know, all it takes is a tag and, he can drop a really stinky score. That's why I've got him on the bench, because I can see him dropping another 60 or 70 at a inopportune time, but I can still see him hitting 130s and being one of the top scorers. So he can sit on the bench and, just quietly, he might be on his way to a third Brownlow. So, last year there were a lot of people saying, oh, he didn't deserve it, yada, yada. And I'm not going to get into that argument. My take is if you win a Brownlow, you deserve it, whatever the situation. He might be just gunning for a third just so no one can doubt him. Anyway, digress. Also on the bench, I'm going to put Geordie Dawson and I'm going to remove Sarong.
Okay.
So Dawson, a bit similar to Neale with the ups and downs. He's got the huge ceiling, and then every now and then he'll drop a 60. But I think he will finish the year well. I think the Crows will finish the year well, and we'll start to see more of what they're going to look like next year. It'll be a better midfield balance of experience and youth. And the thing I love about Dawson is, obviously as a Crows man, but as a fantasy player, is he, as the captain of the club, just takes it upon himself to put himself where he needs to be, whether that's behind the ball, taking, intercept marks, taking kick-ins, or chucks himself forward, he'll clunk a couple of big marks, or even playing in that role where the opposition's trying to get it down the field. Usually it's a big ruckman that will take that mark. It's Jordan Dawson. He's so tall for a midfield. I like Bont. Anyway, so he gets a lot of +6s. But he can sit on the bench because, he can drop a stinky 60. So I've also, the reason I removed Sarong, I've talked about this the last couple of weeks. I think he's a low ton guy at the moment. There's nothing I'm seeing to convince me otherwise. Maybe next year, after another preseason, we'll see him turn into a 110, 115 guy, more what we thought this year would be. Butters can come in for Brayshaw as well. I'm all for the Brayshaw theory, and I loved him as a real unique pick in the last few weeks. And I know it was a strange game down in Tassie, but this has been the story of Brayshaw's year. He'll give you hope, and then he'll score an 80. So I couldn't have him in my list. Whereas Zach Butters, similar to Neil, if a tag comes, I'd be a bit nervous, but his ceiling and the way he's getting around the ground, like he had was it 130 last week? He didn't even have that many CBAs. And the week before he scored similar and was subbed off early-ish in the last. So we're just scratching the surface of what Butters could do. So he could have a 6-week, 7-week run that is like no other. And then Adam Treloar, echoing what Bales said, I would have been happy for him to sit there based on what he's done. But after the laid out, there's just going to be questions every week. So I could see him missing this week again, and then that rules him out. And to replace him, I'd put Tom Green, who he's finally doing it, boys. He's finally putting it together, scoring the tons, and he could finish in a big way as well as the Giants push for finals and hopefully greater things for them.
Nice, some interesting names.
I got a Smokey, MJ.
Here we go.
And it's easy to come up with Smokey because if it doesn't happen, it's like, well, it was a Smokey, so it doesn't count.
Samberry.
No. He's not a Smokey, he's a guarantee. No, Luke Parker on the weekend. Now, MJ, you know me, I like picking players who I think there may be an individual motivation beyond the team. He has sat all season in the twos, and then obviously got the suspension. He's watched Taylor Adams go past him from another club come in. Luke Parker is one of the heart and soul players of Sydney. If they're going to go and win the flag, you better believe he's going to be part of it. So I reckon if they release him into the midfield, Mills, he's not going to go straight in the guts. They're going to ease him in. Perhaps Warner and who else am I thinking of in the midfield there? Heaney.
Robottom.
Yeah, Robot. I reckon it might be time for the old bull to step in and say, boys, this is when the season gets going. Follow me. So I'm not suggesting he's top 10, but gee, I wouldn't be surprised if he went bang from here as well.
All right. That's an interesting shout. So some big changes there. You've both kind of taken 4 or 5 players out. If you do want to go, I won't take too many of the projection numbers. You've got to pay for that at Stats by Jaiden. You've got to support a brother. But I'll tell you this about what he's got as Liberatore. He's got him projected for this week, going at 113, inside the top 10 scorers for the week. So again, this is not a bias model. It's purely data and the inputs that he's got. That's where, again, while we've got you guys to base your best for the rest off the database rather than anything else. Gawn could play this week. Let's head into the rucks. And Jaiden has said, look, if he's playing, he's been an amazing selection for us this year. Let's keep running on the premise that he's not playing this week. Is there any changes, Bales, that you'd make to Marshall, English, and Cherry to the ruck division that he's got through there? Or do you think, again, Gawn coming back from injury dependent, he's pretty much got it right with the projections?
Oh, Marshall, I think, is there. I think, and me and Jorlox were talking about this as well. I think that he's probably been a bit disrespected almost, even by myself, who I've been an owner of him for the better part of, since I got him in the buys. So I've been an owner of him for, 6 weeks. So it's interesting when you sort of look at Marshall's numbers, and I think it's because of Tom Campbell and sort of the continued him being there. Does he come in? But apparently Cam needs a test this week. If he comes in, St Kilda haven't played in the last 2 weeks. Marshall's looked really good, particularly last week. If he's at solo ruck, I think you just need him, especially with his last 2 matchups at Geelong and Carlton in the potentially grand final or prelim final and grand final of your league. So he's a guy you're going to want. And he's got that ceiling as well that we're chasing at this time of year. English is the interesting one. So he's obviously got a great matchup this week. I know that Jaiden will have him high in the projections with that Geelong matchup there. But it's his run after that I'm not actually a big fan of. So he's got Sydney at the SCG, so Brodie Grundy, goes into Max Gawn. Then he's got the Crows. So Riley O'Brien's not an easy ruckman to score against, even though Crows have been considered a sort of neutral to green matchup this year. Then he's got Tristan Cherry, who has been really difficult to score. And then Briggsy has actually been performing quite well of late and has been a bit more restrictive than what they were at the start of the year. So, but English is a ruckman that doesn't rely on on the hit out batter, right? He's a guy that gets all his points either by working his extra midfield at stoppage or getting his transition points. So I can definitely see why English is up there. I still probably have Cherry in my 2 on field, just because, again, his run, he's got Carlton, Geelong, Richmond, West Coast, Bulldogs, Hawthorn. That's a really nice run for the rest of the year. And then I've probably got Nank as well there, who's also got a very nice run. There's a bit of a point of difference as well. But I guess the unknown is Gawn, right? His run is pretty good after the Freo matchup. Well, he's got Giants, Bulldogs, Port, Gold Coast, and Collingwood. So the only one that probably scares you is probably the Gold Coast matchup. But Gawn's gone. So if he returns and he's fine, he could be that play, drops a bit in price, pick him up. So I'd probably, my best 3, I think I'd have probably Marshall, Cherry, Gawn. But if Gawn isn't back to what he is, I think Nate could probably slide in. And then obviously English is good. But it's a tough one. Rux is going to probably decide where a lot of people finish at the end of the year, I think.
Yeah, it's a good shout, Jordox, for you. Some interesting names that Bales has brought into the conversation too. Grundy, Inat, Nankervis has got a brilliant fixture run and really hasn't let coaches down that have brought into him since their bye. But who's your top couple of rucks? English, Cherry is what he's got as the base.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add, really. I think Marshall and English, I'll be pretty comfortable with them at 1 and 2 from here on. Marshall, as Bale said, it just hasn't mattered the circumstances that have come his way, playing with Campbell, losing the key forward. He just gets it done. And his ceiling is just unlike any of the others, really. English I like just because he just finds a way. The only thing I was tossing up is with Cherry, could I make an argument for Brodie Grundy, who has been not the forgotten man, but his scoring has been pretty damn good. Like any other year, it'd be like, oh, Brodie Grundy, R1, R2. But the Rucks have just we've been spoilt for choice at the top line there. So I tried to make an argument for Grundy instead of Cherry, but what a season the X is having. I mean, his tackling is just ensuring that his baseline of scoring with the hit outs, he doesn't have to do too much else to get a good score. And thankfully for owners, he does anyway. So look, his ceiling's not quite there, but gosh, he's only just getting started. So for future years, but no, I'd leave it as it is. Marshall, English and Cherry, I'm pretty comfortable with that.
Yep. And again, the caveat is if Gawn's fit and playing, he goes straight to the top of the tree. And I think, Bales, you alluded to that as well, too. So I think we're all, if Gawn's back, oh boy, he has got the healing powers of Tom Stewart. That is for sure, my friend.
I reckon he might be.
And Jordox, you flagged this. You flagged this last week. You said on Tuesday on our live Q&A show, you were just like, it would not shock me if Max Gawn is back next week. And you were saying, is there a play where you could hold him? So, and I'm just going to say, it's not
if it wasn't for the Heaney suspension, I'd probably... Anyway, it's...
Ifs, buts, and maybes. Let's talk about the forwards. There's 8 names. I think 4 of them we don't really need to talk about too much. I'm happy to have the argument if someone wants to at me. But Flanders, Zorko, Heaney, Caldwell... outside of injury, which I know Caldwell was training and being off on his own today on the track on a Tuesday day. But look, I think for the most part, we're going to put these guys in our top 8 forwards for the rest of the year. So let's take them out of the equation. Let's talk about the final 4, and you can tell me what you're going to do with that. He's got Simpkin, Jackson, with the similar caveat of Crisp, which is, man, if Darcy's back, he falls out of contention. Sounds like he's back. So we could probably argue he'll drop out, but I'm keen to hear your lads' thoughts in a second. And then he's got Myers and Mackay. It's a nice run for Carlton key position forwards coming up. That might feel like more of a super coach call, but no, according to Jaiden, he sits in there. So the 4 we're not going to talk about because I think they're the universal 4. They're there. So Simpkin, Jackson, Myers, Mackay. Who of those 4 stay in the top 8 for you, Bales? And who might sneak in if you're taking one of these boys out?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, and you boys talked about it on Sunday night as well, that the Simpkin one is probably a person that if people haven't got him, he's one that you could look at definitely bringing in. We mentioned with Sheasel, North run to end the year is really good. Fisher, is another one that I like as well that could easily come back into calculations. And probably the other one I really like, because again, with these forwards, right, there's a blanket over potentially 10 names. Like based on matchups, we could have any sort of number of players that go. But the other one I like, Dylan Moore. Starting off this week against Collingwood, it just feels like a game at the MCG. Collingwood giving up points. This is virtual elimination final for almost both teams. Dylan Moore's I think, gonna have a pretty good game. I think he goes into he's got the Crows well. We kicked 5 goals against her in the year. A couple of tougher games, but then he finishes off with, I think, North Melbourne and Richmond. I'm not sure what order it is, but he finished off with those two. So with that F6, F5, you're looking for these guys that can pop a 120 on any given week. And we've seen Dylan Moore's done that on a number of occasions. So I think Dylan Moore's got to be in there. And you'd probably sneak Fisher as well into the mix.
Okay, so it sounds like Jackson's going out for you, just to be clear. Jackson's out? Anybody else? Yeah, Myers, Mackay?
Jackson be out. And I think Harry would be out, even though Harry's got some good matchups and he could be a good one to bring in for every week. But yeah, I'd probably say Fisher and Moore come in for Mackay and Jackson. Okay. And I'd keep Simpkin in there.
Yep, nice. I love that call. What about for you, Jordox, of those final 4? If you want to fight me to put a Isaac Heaney on the list, we'll happily hear that one. But I think most people are happy to keep those 4 in there. Any ins and outs based off the projections you've got?
Yeah, I just think this is probably the line that I don't think any of us are going to get this right, because there's going to be someone that we haven't even thought of yet that's going to come home strong. So I don't have any offers of who that'll be, but what we've got is Fisher is someone that Bales had said as well. It's interesting with Fisher because he's actually on the website or the app, whatever you're using, as injured, but he's not. He played VFL last week. So he's a really curious one. He put together, 4 tons in a row, maybe, something like that, in that role. Then he got injured, and then they won a game without him, and that was with McKercher in that role. So they didn't bring him back, and then they got flogged by Sydney. So do we see them go back and bring Fisher in that role, sharing with McKercher? And can he score enough? I think he can. So I'd have him in over... I'd have him in over Mackay. Key forwards are very hard to nail the run, to nail when they go big. I don't know what's happening with Charlie Curnow, but I think he's going to have to lift for Carlton's sake. So I actually would have Curnow ahead of Mackay. Okay. But I'd need to know more about this niggle he's got. I think he's carrying something. Anyway, so we can take Mackay out and chuck Fisher in. The rest of it's pretty, like Bales said. I mean, you could take Jackson out, chuck in Dylan Moore, whatever. A comment on Jackson, though, because Darcy will return this week, as we've been told. His scoring with Darcy hasn't been that terrible, and I think he's got the confidence in him now to finish the year. Freo are playing so much better than they were earlier in this year. So I don't mind leaving Jackson in there and probably put him on the bench for Myers, and then you can have Fisher can stay on the bench with Jackson. The other one is Mason Wood. I mean, the DPPs came and went the other week with not much said. Mason Wood was a really interesting one. I mean, St Kilda playing every game at Marvel. They've lost Philippou, who was taking up the midfield minutes. I don't know what Wood's been doing, but I know he can score 90s for fun, and he has a ceiling game too. So, yeah, I don't mind him as well, but I'll leave it at that.
I think that's the scary thing, isn't it? We're looking at these guys at F5 and F6, and for coaches looking at their teams right now going, oh, do I want to move on Jackson? Do I want to move on Rankin, who we had to force move a couple of weeks ago? People forcing a Jai Simpkin out of their team because they're not really happy with it over the past, 3 to 4 weeks, maybe not so much over the past week, but going, I need to get out of him. Outside of that top 4, throw a blanket. I really wouldn't be wasting that much energy or trade focus at F5 and F6. It's a lottery. Like, there's a player I love there, which is Brad Hill. If he plays on the wing at Marvel, the fixture for wingman for St Kilda is glorious. But are you really going there? It's why Philippou was so tempting for coaches this week, because it was like, it frees up cash. It's a pretty good role. It's a good scoring at venue, and it makes it so attractive. I just wouldn't be spending any time at all just wasting magnet time at F6. Find someone and go, and spend much more time playing the fixture run or the ownership game or the head-to-head, whichever your focus is in leagues, ranks, or ownership, or whatever it is. I just wouldn't waste any trade time there unless you've got something that is a ticking time bomb that you want to get off really fast. And you could probably put a Jackson in that if you really are desperate to. But to me, if you've got Caldwell, you've got Heaney, you've got Zorko, you've got Flanders, they're so far and above. Throw a blanket. Moore could go 60 or 130 one week. Myers can go 50 one week, 105 the next week. Jackson can get you a 70 or a 110. Like, it's such variable, just roller coaster scoring. It's just not worth trading almost into something if you could potentially do something else. So on that, we are in luxury trade phase. And I've loved hearing your guys' thoughts about who and how you'd prioritize players. Like you both talked about, acknowledging Fremantle, for example, have this beautiful inside midfield run of players. Like, over the next couple of weeks, they've got Melbourne, they've got West Coast, they've got Geelong. The 3 of their next 4 that are all historically and certainly recently great on paper. But a Sarong, man, on paper, is someone you're happy. I even know someone dropped him to their bench and took Humphrey's score because they're like, I am taking a guaranteed low ton over the risk of a potential 140, 150. And so hearing how you guys process and what you value, whether it be league or ranking focused, it's to a degree irrelevant. So I'm keen to ask you boys this question, which I think a lot of the AFL fantasy community are consciously or subconsciously pondering. What should we be prioritizing, or what do you, is probably a better question. What do you put greater value on at the moment with the trades you look to make? Is it the potential scoring of a player based off their history, whether it be recently of what they've done against that opponent, or recently in terms of what they've done this year, their recent scoring history, so their own personal last 3, last 5? Is it the fixture of who they've got coming up and how easy or hard they are to score against? Or is it ownership? Like, these are 4 or 5 really important variables that we all have to kind of put into some kind of order. I'm not going to ask you to put them into an order for me, but Bale's view, like, which is a leader for you? I don't think it matters too much whether it's a ranking or a league focus. I think they're still there to a margin degree. Which of those feels like the lead indicators that you value most with trading into or out of players?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of things, to be honest, because it's so hard, right? Because when I was sort of thinking about this, I was like, well, you look at the first example comes to me is a Dan Houston, right? We looked at his run. He's got this awesome run. He has St Kilda. He's obviously got Richmond this week. He's got all these good matchups. I think he drops a 47 against St Kilda, which is meant to be one of, if not the best matchup for designated kickers. Like, just you sort of see these matchups, but it doesn't always work out that way. So it's probably a combination of runs, but also players that are proven scorers. So like Houston, for example, we know, and I know Liam, obviously a friend of obviously all of us in the community, was brought Houston in, but he said he knows he's going to get a stinker at some point from Houston. He just hoped it wasn't going to be while he owned him, and unfortunately he dropped a couple. So guys like that you can't trust, but it's guys like your Gouldens, your Dunkleys, your Bontempellis, your Harry Sheasels, your Dacos, like Caldwells, all these guys that are proven over a stretch of either seasons or a period of time this year. You want to be targeting those guys. And then probably the other thing I look at is, especially for your F5, F6, M7, M8, D5, and D6, I want those guys that have got the ceilings, that that, okay, they might have a floor, but they've got that ceiling score that can really push you towards top 100, top 1,000, top 10,000, sort of your league matchups, whatever you're playing for. So like a guy like a Nick Newman in defense, we know he's got like a ceiling there. And then you look at like the midfielders, there are a number of midfielders who've got big ceilings. We see like a guy like LDU, who was in the projections, went on a run of over 115 at the back end of last year. You look at the rucks as well, like almost all of them have got big ceilings. It's whichever ones you've got on any given week can go big, and hopefully you own both. So those people that owned a Darcy Cameron or a Kieran Briggs and then a Marshall last week get that massive bump. But if you had Tristan Cherry and I can't think of a ruck that went a little bit quiet last week, if you had those two, then all of a sudden you're missing out on points. So yeah, for me, it's probably just a mixture of trying to escape those really bad floor scores, like your Houston sort of sub 60 scores, and then trying to get those ceiling players that have got the good runs coming up, I think.
Yeah, it's good. Jordox, for you, and echoing some similar sentiments or some things to add off the back of what Bales has just shared for us?
Yeah, no, Bales is a very, very good at analysing and playing the game that way. And look, I like to play that way too, and I'm a numbers man, and trends, something you absolutely look for. But I guess when it comes to fixtures, and I've never really been big and a big subscriber of easy fixtures, hard fixtures for players in fantasy. I don't really know why, because the data is the data. It's real. It's not made up. But I think, what you said before, Bales, like there was a perfect lineup and then he scored terrible, because that's footy. That's just what happens. And, I always had this thing. Sometimes I fear that a matchup is too good. Like where do we have, I can't remember what it was recently, Zorko. Maybe it was even just against West Coast this week, or there was a game and it was like, I put the VC on Zorko because I knew everyone else would be, and I couldn't afford to miss that ceiling. But it was like, on paper, it was perfect matchup, and then he didn't blow it out of the water. So I play the game more on instinct and gut feel, and sometimes that can go against the numbers. But I think with numbers, there's always anomalies. So if you can pick the anomaly and get it right when everyone else has jumped on the other side, zig when others zag, I guess they say. So I don't discredit the fixtures and the fact that data is real. It doesn't put me off as much if I'm targeting a player, because I like the way he's playing. I like his form. I like his role, and I have a feeling about him. I won't be put off too much by the fixture. Even stadiums, like it's great. It's all well and good that we say St Kilda play all their games at Marvel. It doesn't guarantee anything. It's just, it sounds good. Dry, it's not going to be wet. And then the other thing I look at, a lot is time on ground, role changes, that sort of stuff. And time on ground, not necessarily the more time on ground, the more you score, more about points per minute. So if I see a player that's scored a little lower, but he actually had less time on ground than normal, and his points per minute is still strong, I tend to look at that more than their total score. So, yeah, there's a few little insights into the way I play the game. And, the beauty of the game, as you boys know, and everyone listening knows, is there's so many ways to play it. And every year, you could say, oh, that was the year to play that strategy. It doesn't mean the next year you play that strategy and it works. There are infinite variables in every player. You could have a player whose role, the form, the matchup, the stadium, the price, and on the day, that individual person has a headache and just doesn't play very well. It's just, you can't pick it. But we try, and that's why we love it.
Or you get a Bont game where he's got gastro and like looks like he's not going to play, and he comes out and tortures Freo. So it's a funny game that not only the AFL players play, but we also play.
It's all quite random. We just try and put as much formation of that random chaos. We try to organise the chaos in our minds, to try and achieve what we're trying to achieve in the game. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's all just up to chance.
So let me give you guys two different players. One, you might balk at the suggestion of a trade out. Another, I think, just based on hearing you speak throughout this episode, despite whether he does sit inside Jaiden's projected best, both of these guys do. One, I think we're probably going to balk at the suggestion of a trade. I'm not saying you should. I just want to put it out there to help people hear your processing, to help them make decisions for themselves. One, you'll balk at. One, you'll be like, no, absolutely fine, but it's there. So at the moment, in the last 5 weeks, the worst team to play against for inside midfielders is Hawthorn. Over the last 5 weeks, they are the worst for inside mids. Hawthorn this week also have a player that historically is more than happy to attach himself like a human shield to a player by the name of Nick Dacos. He came in earlier in the year. If we see Nick Dacos's name have a Finn McGuinness getting into the Hawthorn team, the combination of a bad history against McGuinness and Hawthorn being the most restrictive team for inside midfielders at the moment. I know it breaks every conventional rule, but history would say this is not a good matchup to be in. It's why so many faded Dacos to start the year. It was the fear of the McGuinness tag. It didn't hurt too much. Rather, it was the St Kilda game. So it leads into that point that you've alluded to there, Jordox, there of, well, nothing's always certain. But why are we talking about trading out of a Caleb Sarong, for example, who, yes, he doesn't have the form, but has the fixture. But then we look at a player like Dacos, who has better form, but not a good fixture, especially this week, historically against Hawthorn. Why in the community are we looking at Sarong as he's got to go because he's out of form, but the fixture's good, but then not even considering a Dacos who, yeah, his scoring's fine. He's probably owned equally as highly in the top ownerships or leagues areas, but we're not considering that. So talk me through that thought process, Bales. Is there something that lends itself to you to be more biased is probably a too much of a loaded phrase, but to incline to consider moving out of some data points as a leading indicator as opposed to some others?
Yeah, and the Dacos one is really interesting, isn't it? Because we saw last year a lot of coaches were at around this time last year again that coaches were looking at trading out a Dacos, or some even savvy coaches put Dacos on the bench. He's already scored, had a look, and he obviously got I think it was a 47 or something like that. Obviously injury affected, but he was on track for a pretty putrid score unless he did had a Nick Martin fourth quarter and absolutely saved it at the end there. If Finn McGuinness is named, and to borrow a fellow coaches panel member, Minnie Monk's term of team dependent, if your team allows it and you don't have these Tom Powells, even Sextons, if you still had him, if you don't have some of these issue players, I think it is a genuine play as a 1 week play, especially because Dacos is in a line where there are a good 10, 12, 14 defenders on any given week that could put up a good score. And if you went a Dacos this week to a Nick Newman, if you didn't have a Sheezel, you can trade him out and you want to get him back in, a Nasai Wanganeen or Jack Sinclair, Max Holmes, Tom Stewart, Trent Rivers, like the list goes on. I think it is a play that you could consider if your team was in that position. Is my team in that position? Probably not. I've probably got a couple of players I want to move on. Will Powell, another Powell that I've got to move on. I'd probably rather do that. But the Dacos one, it's definitely a play. And that's what we've probably got to look at now at this point, is when there's an obvious tag that's going to be there, that's something to be looking at. And in terms of Sarong, I've heard a few people say that maybe Neil Bullen goes to him. I think if Melbourne are looking at it, Neil Bullen hasn't been a full-time inside mid and playing as a forward. I wouldn't be shocked if Neil Bullen went to a Jordan Clark this week. It wouldn't shock me. And then Sarong gets off the chain. Melbourne, a good matchup for midfielders, and he goes and pops a 115 and you've traded him out. So it is this luxury trade season. You can trade someone out. They go 120, bring someone in, they go 60. It's the name of the game, but it's a tough one. But it's a good point you raised. People saying about Sarong, trading him out, and Dacos has got a tough matchup. So something that coaches can definitely consider this week.
Of course, the risk is you trade him out. By the way, he's got Richmond next week if you can't get back
exactly.
into it.
Yes.
That's the risk point there. I know you had something to add to this conversation, Jordox.
Yeah, so I guess the initial question was, why do we have this mindset with a Sarong but not with a Dacos? And I guess it's just the way our brains are wired, because Sarong, when you look at him, there's 5 weeks or 6 weeks of underperforming. And Dacos, there's, he actually hasn't been that good, Dacos, in fantasy, but, there's tons in there, and there's the name factor as well. He's just about one of the best players in the AFL. So my point is, sometimes we just see what we see rather than what's to come. So we tend to base a lot of what we do on what's already happened, and we don't focus as much on what's to come. And, so I think that's the simple answer, that just the psychology of how we look at things. I love it. I love the idea of doing it. But again, I talked about fixturing earlier being something that I think is, a great resource and great to split 2 players you're 50-50 on. But it's not the be-all and end-all to me. And I think the tag watch and the future projection of tagging, like, I thought it was, I won't say crazy, but the Nick Dacos conversation in pre-season, I really found staggering. It made sense because remember the buys we had earlier in the year? It feels like a lifetime ago. So we had him having an early buy. He had the Finn McGuinness potential game, and then that was sandwiched between a buy and a game with Port Adelaide. But I'm just not big on 1 week things. Like, everyone plays everyone, and with a starting squad anyway. But Lockie Whitfield, I just want to bring him up, okay? For me, he has changed the way I'm going to play this game from now on, and that is not to fear the tag, not to let the future tag affect your trading. So there was a period where I was going to pick him up, and I thought, no, because he's got the James Jordan tag coming, and then maybe, and then there was a Chincotta one, and he just blew it out of the water. He just blew the theory out. Like, it didn't matter. So, and even Nick Dacos, I mean, did McInnes play in that game earlier this year and even tag him? I don't.
Yeah,
very loosely.
Yeah,
very loosely.
First half he tagged him, and second half it was off, and he still got 95, so still 26 touches.
And I remember a couple of weeks before that St Kilda game, it didn't make any sense, but he scored a 61, Dacos. So I just think if you like a player and you think he's one of the best, don't stop because there's a potential. And I use the word potential. We all think we know what is going to happen week to week with tags and players. End of the day, we actually don't. And the coaches, they pull stuff out that we don't expect. Great call from Bales before about Neil Bullen. I'm pretty sure he will go to Sarong.
Yeah.
But we don't know that he might go to a Geordie Clark, like you said. So to base your future plans and your trades based on, essentially a what if, I like to stick to the form and the data and go with that.
Look, Jack Graham went to Cogs last week instead of Whitfield, who you'd think Jack Graham, Whitfield, or Tom Green even, but Cogs. Like, it's just, you can't pick it sometimes.
I heard someone say, Jack Graham, he's never tagged, and I just started having
2017 nightmares.
Cold sweats.
Yeah.
Very slow. Oh.
It's interesting. Like, both of you talked about how good Zach Butters has been at the moment, like 3 scores over 120, a bunch of 130s in the last month. And you would argue on paper right now, he's one of the 4 midfielders. Richmond this week, they're not as easy to score against in the last 5 with the return of, he's not there this week, Taranto, but with Hopper back, with Prestia back, they're back closer to their first choice midfield where they were completely decimated and depleted for the first and middle half of the year. But after this, Port Adelaide have Richmond, so Graham tag, maybe. After that, Carlton, Chincotta tag. After that, Sydney, James Jordan tag. Now, he's normally gone more to the rebounders, James Jordan, but has done some inside midfield work. Melbourne, Neil Bullen tag. This is, I think to almost look to wrap up the episode, this is the hard spot where we're getting now as a community, is we're looking at players that a month ago we would never have consider trading out. Sarong was never on our radars. Crisp was probably never on our radars. Simpkin was probably never on our radars. And now we're at the challenging space, and you both talked about this, where you think you're making a trade, you're spending 100, 200,000, whatever it is. You're using a trade on a player to shaft one bloke out, and you end up regressing 50, 80, 100 points, let alone on what you did with your captain calls, which can be another 30 points of variation without some injuries there. You can actually hurt your team with these luxury trades because of fear of something that could come, jumping at shadows of what a fixture might be, jumping off form when a game hasn't been favourable, like it wasn't for Luke Ryan on the weekend. I remember you talking about that earlier at the start of this podcast, Bales, and also you, Jordox, reflecting it. So it is that time of year where luxury trades are great and fixture analysis is helpful and data and trends. If we're not careful, and also if we don't have a slight piece of luck go our way, the trades we make now, we could actually cost ourselves some points. That's the challenge of the moment, isn't it, Bales?
Yeah, exactly. And I think with the tags especially as well, because it's obviously been a lot more regular with tags this year than in previous years. Obviously, like I remember 5-10 years ago playing fantasy and there were a lot of tags, and we had that period where the teams were just going head to head and they're all here. And as Jordox said, you look at you trade players out like Lockie Whitfield, like he goes tons up against Chincotta, which I know Chincotta went more to cogs that night, which again, the tags, you can't predict where they're going to go. And then he turned up against Jordan, who kept into a 48 in the other game. So you can't predict what's going to happen. And that's sort of the thing, not only myself and the community just got to remember, is that every week is a new week, and one player could go from being tagged to a 60 or 70 and then put up a 140 the next week. So it's so hard to predict. We can only go sort of what we're looking at. But then just on Butters actually looking at that, I do think that the next 3 games he'll cob attention. So if I was looking at him, I'm personally not going to be looking at him at the moment. But if someone else is keen on him, like you couldn't talk anyone out of someone like a Zach Butters.
No, that form's been pretty good. Hey, lads, it's been so good chatting to both of you, getting your thoughts, not only on unpacking some of these projections bases that we've got from Jaiden, but also just kind of picking your brains a little bit for the things that are helping you make the decisions and the leading indicators for either trading into or out of players over these next couple of weeks. Jordox, mate, as always, a pleasure. Thank you so much for jumping back on the podcast, my friend. I'm sure you've got a Fantasy Fanatics podcast to do pretty soon too.
Yeah, we do. But yeah, great to be on. Great to have Bales on as well. Good to see you, boys.
And Bales, where can we get in touch with yourself across social media? And also, if we haven't managed to find our way into the AFL Fantasy Fanatics community, where can we check out what you're doing, both the videos and also the audio podcasts and the Twitter spaces as well?
Yeah, so just myself, I'm just at Bales DT across all the social media platforms, so pretty easy to find me there. And then in terms of AFL Fantasy Fanatics, yeah, you got obviously AFL Fantasy Fanatics on YouTube, at AFL Fantasy Fans on Twitter. We do content, well, I do content daily, and then we've got obviously our Sunday night round reviews after the final game, and our Tuesday night live Q&As, which we'll obviously be recording shortly, and then our pre-lockout chats that we do just after Ball Boys as well. So check them out and then come watch ours as well. Just before lockout hits on the Friday, answering a heap of questions. So it's always good fun. But pleasure to be on, MJ and Jordox, mate. I'll talk to you soon.
You boys will be talking in about 20 minutes time. If you missed where you can get in touch with these boys across social media, or you're like, oh, where was that place? What was the name of the thing? The good news is we've got all the details of the links of the YouTube channels, social media, where you can find the boys across the podcast channel as well. All the details in the description of this episode, as well as where you can find all your links to the Infinite Wealth kit that the guys have been gifting away, thousands of dollars worth of resources that one of the fellow panelists, for sake of a better phrase, of the Fanatics have put in there. Guess he's doing a fantastic job. These guys have done a fantastic bit of work with the Content Creators Cup as well.
One last thing, MJ.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, mate. Sorry. I've got to get a quick plug in for at AFL Subs on X. If you haven't found that account already, go and find it, like it, and subscribe, and you will get a notification buzzing in your pocket an hour before the bounce with the subs. So no more looking
And-
through all the different websites.
And you get notifications for late change as well. That Trelaw one came through as well pretty much straight away as soon as it was.
That's right.
No,
Yes.
I can't recommend enough as well.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. And I hope for all the AFL fantasy coaches' sake, it is a resource we need for 6 more weeks only. And it's not something we have to have for the rest of the year, although that'll
Fingers
be helpful
crossed.
for laid out. So we'll see how we go. So if you want to get the details for that, it's in there. The links for the podcast and video, it's in our description, as well as that Infinite Wealth Kit. Make sure you go and do that. Hey, good luck this week with the trades you make, whether you're trying to hit an overall PB ranking or it's a do or die league matchup that's going to define your league results. We hope things are favorable to you. We hope your captains nail it nice and early, the VC in the week, so you don't have to be stressed with who you're putting on as that Sunday skipper selection. We hope your trades are favorable for you as well. From all of us here at the Coaches Panel, we wish you an absolute ton of good luck, and we can't wait to be chatting with you again next week. Good luck for the week ahead.